Continuing Pike's discussion on page 11, he notes the Holy Bible square and compasses. Now this is interesting. This is somewhat confusing even among Masons. I've read various different studies of some Masons who disagree with this assessment. But I do believe Pike's right. At least this is how I've been coming to understand this particular issue of the volume of the Sacred Law. So I'll share with you Pike's idea and let you know I agree with this. They're the great lights in Masonry. That's how they're styled. He further notes that the idea of having the Bible in the lodges, interestingly, even up to his day, this has sometimes been made as a pretext for excluding Jews from our lodge. Now that's interesting, pretext, because they cannot regard the New Testament as a holy book. The Bible is an indispensable part of the furniture of a Christian lodge, only because it is the sacred book of the Christian religion. The Hebrew Pentateuch in a Hebrew lodge and the Quran in a Mohammedan lodge belong on the altar. And one of these, and the square and compasses properly understood, are the great lights by which a Mason must walk and work. Our obligations are taken on the volume of the Sacred Law. This ensures that he will deem it more solemn and binding, and therefore it is not asked. It was that you were asked of what religion you were. We have no other concern with your religious creed. The idea is to give you a solemn text to do an obligation. The volume of Sacred Law is sometimes identified as the Bible, and that is false. It is a volume of Sacred Law deemed sacred to whatever religious creed you happen to belong to. Freemasonry cuts across the religious lines and unifies all brothers of all faiths, and you are allowed and encouraged to use your volume of the Sacred Law you deem fit. I think that eliminates an incredible amount of animosity between different religions within the Brotherhood of Masonry. I think that's genius, in my opinion. And then, of course, you have the square and the compass, and these belong to geometry. With the square, of course, you can draw a square, and with the compass, of course, you whirl circles, except in the matter of trigonometry. So that the idea is with squares and triangles, one represents the earth, the other represents heaven, and the two are put together. It's very interesting. The heaven and the soul are put together on the earth, and we do our work there. The divine ever mingles with the human, and the earthly and the spiritual intermixes, he says on page 12. There is something spiritual in the commonest duties of life. If you can look at life that way, it takes on a whole new dimension. There is something spiritual in the commonest duties of life. It's not all just drudgery and boredom. We're so determined these days to worry more about being entertained than instructed and educated that it's pathetic how miserable we have become in our knowledge. The nations are not body politic alone, but are souls politic. And woe to that people which, seeking the material only, forgets that it has a soul. Then we have a race petrified in dogma, which presupposes the absence of a soul and the presence only of memory and instinct, or demoralized by filthy lucre. Yeah, no kidding. Such a nature can never lead civilization. Civilization will always crumble because of that. Genuflection before the idol or the dollar atrophies the muscle which walks and the will which moves. In other words, if all you're interested in is making a buck, or a 2, or 10, or 50 million, or whatever, you really are poverty, even though you have a lot of money. It's too bad. A free people forgetting that it has a soul, to be cared for, devotes all of its energies to its material advancement. If it makes war, it is to subserve its commercial interests. The citizens copy after the state and regard wealth, pomp, and luxury as the great goods of life. Now, a nation that has that attitude accumulates wealth rapidly, but distributes it badly. You can see that every day on the news, can't you? Yeah, we're in that predicament. Man, he said this over 100 years ago. Thence the two extremes of monstrous opulence. Pike had no idea. If he could live today, it would blow his mind, wouldn't it? Monstrous opulence and monstrous misery. All the enjoyments to a few, all the privations to the rest, to the people. Privilege, exception, monopoly, feudality, springing up from labor itself, a false and dangerous situation, he says, which making labor a blinded and chained cyclops in the mine, at the forge, in the workshop, at the loom, in the field, over poisonous fumes, in miasmic cells, in unventilated factories, founds public power upon private misery, and plants the greatness of the state in the suffering of the individual. It is a greatness ill constituted, in which all the material elements are combined, and in which no moral element enters. If a people like a star has a right of eclipse, the light ought to return. The eclipse should not degenerate into night. Got a quick message I got to turn off there. So this idea of chasing after wealth as if it is the final goal and meaning of life is simply too short-sighted. It's too small-souled. If you're going to chase after wealth, do it in order to help the poor. That's the proper use of wealth. So the three lesser lights are the sun, the moon, and the master of the lodge. So you have the symbolism of three all the time within the lodge of a Freemason group. And of course, he talks more about them of what they are, the symbols to the Mason, so on and so forth. The sun is the ancient symbol of the life-giving and generative power of the deity. I mean, all civilizations in antiquity viewed the sun in this manner. To the ancients, light was the cause of life, and God was the source from which all light flowed. You know, God is light. Yeah, ho theos ho phos. The essence of light, the invisible fire, developed as flame, manifested as light and splendor. The sun was his manifestation and visible image. The Sabaeans worshipped the light god. In essence, they seemed to be worshipping the sun, in whom they saw the manifestation of the deity. The moon had a capacitive capacity in nature, of course, the female idea. The life-giving power and energy was the male. It was the symbol of Isis, Astarte, and Artemis, or Diana. The master of life was the supreme deity above both and manifested through both. Zeus, the son of Saturn, became king of the gods. Horus, son of Osiris and Isis, became the master of life. Dionysus, or Bacchus, like Mithras, became the author of light and life and truth. So you see this concept again throughout all the ancient civilizations and religions. The other thing that Pike does in his Morals and Dogma is he gives an enormous wealth of comparative religion. He's not describing or explaining a lot of Freemasonry in a lot of this. He is comparing and contrasting other religious faiths, other religious doctrines, their philosophies, the various symbolisms they had for their deities, etc. And in some of these instances, a lot of the critics, as well as some of us Freemasons, get confused about this, so I will try to point that out to you. It's an excellent study for comparative religion, if nothing else. A lot of the people will take it out of context and say, see, this is what Freemasons believe, and all Pike was doing was explaining what the ancient Egyptians thought, or the ancient Sabaeans, or the ancient Greeks. That'll be important to keep in context when we get to those points. So, okay, we've worked our way to page 13. We're over halfway through this first chapter. That hasn't been so painful, has it? Really interesting so far.